This meant you were poor in the 1970s. In the 1970s, being poor wasn't always loud. It lived in the corners of the kitchen, in hand-me-down jeans and powdered milk. This video isn't about pity, it's about memory. Join us as we revisit 20 quiet, unmistakable signs that told the world you weren't rich, but you got by. Powdered milk. They didn't call it powdered milk at our house. It was simply the milk, as if naming it anything more would invite comparison. You'd shuffle into the kitchen, bleary-eyed from sleep, and reach for the plastic pitcher in the fridge, hoping it had been mixed well the night before. Sometimes it had. Sometimes the spoon still stood upright in a swirl of half-dissolved lumps. You poured it anyway. It was thin, it was warm, and it clung to your cereal like it wasn't sure it belonged. But it did belong, on every table where a gallon of the real thing cost more than a family could afford. It came from a box, kept quietly in the back of the cupboard, always ready to step in when the paycheck ran out. It didn't spoil. It didn't argue. It simply endured. No one loved it, though we all drank it. Children winced, fathers frowned, and mothers offered gentle reassurances. "It's milk," they said, though we all knew better. And yet, over time, it became a sort of badge. Proof that you could make do with less and still sit down together each morning. Powdered milk wasn't about taste. It was about getting through, one clumpy spoonful at a time. Jeans. If powdered milk reminded you of what you lacked at the breakfast table, then your jeans told the rest of the world before you said a word. Those tough skins from Sears weren't worn so much as endured. They were stitched from a blend of denim and polyester that felt more industrial than personal. Fabric meant to withstand years, not comfort days. You didn't wear them to make a statement. They made the statement for you. The knees were reinforced with patches thick enough to stop a fall or a small vehicle. They came in colors no one asked for: rust, mustard, mossy green. They creaked when you moved. They itched. And if you had siblings, you already knew your pair had been broken in by someone else, though broken in might be too generous a phrase. Still, they lasted. Through monkey bars, gravel driveways, and summer scrapes, they held strong. Parents prized their practicality. Children dreamed of freedom. But every time you tried to bend your knees or sit cross-legged in class, you remembered exactly who you were and where you stood. If they tore, out came the iron-on patches. If they didn't, you passed them down like heirlooms. Stiff, scratchy heirlooms with stories sewn into every unforgiving seam. Government cheese. When it came to dinner on a tight budget, nothing said resourcefulness quite like that unassuming slab of government cheese. It didn't come with a label or a logo. It came in a plain brown box, heavier than it looked and colder than you'd expect from something that refused to melt properly. It was cheese, or something close enough, and it never ran out when you needed it most. You didn't question it. You simply opened the box and got to work. Cutting it was a task in itself. It fought your butter knives and dulled your good ones, but once it surrendered, it became the backbone of casseroles and sandwiches, a key ingredient in 100 meals that somehow managed to stretch further than your grocery money ever did. Grilled cheese made with it was more glue than goo, and macaroni stuck together like it had secrets to keep. Still, it fed families. It brought comfort. And though no one called it gourmet, no one turned it away either. Mothers tucked it into lunch boxes. Neighbors shared extra blocks from their freezer. In towns large and small, that thick orange square became a quiet symbol of endurance. And in kitchens where little else was guaranteed, it offered consistency, warmth, and a full plate. Ice milk. It may have looked like ice cream, but one bite told you otherwise. Ice milk was the stand-in, the imposter, the pale cousin of the real thing. It waited quietly in the freezer, right beside the cartons of butter and frozen peas, dressed in the same packaging but carrying far less joy. You'd take a spoonful, expecting something rich and velvety, and be met instead with a chill that dissolved too quickly, leaving behind only a faint sweetness and a little disappointment. Still, in those years when money didn't stretch far but expectations had to, ice milk earned its place. It was dessert after all, maybe not the one you dreamed of, but the one you were given. Mothers scooped it into old ceramic mugs or plastic tubs that once held margarine, making the most of what was on hand. Sometimes a bit of syrup tried to dress it up. Sometimes someone stirred it into a milkshake to hide its thinness. It wasn't indulgence, it was ingenuity. And you didn't complain, not out loud, because in homes where every penny mattered, even a meager dessert was an act of kindness. You ate it slowly, with quiet gratitude, and you told yourself it was enough, because more often than not, it had to be. Cereal. Have you ever reached past the bright, familiar boxes on the cereal aisle and knelt down to pick up breakfast wrapped in nothing but hope and thin plastic? Those store-brand bags, with names that sounded more like apologies than promises, were a quiet staple in homes where every dime counted. There were no cartoons on the label, no games on the back, no surprise toys inside. Just puffed corn or flattened flakes with a name like Toasted Crunch trying its best to belong. We didn't complain, at least not too loudly. You poured it into your bowl and listened to the soft rustle, like someone opening packing material. Then came the powdered milk, and the whole thing surrendered before your spoon even touched it. No mascots danced across the screen during Saturday morning cartoons to advertise it, but it was ours. It came in bulk, it came cheap, and it came often. Mothers could stretch a grocery budget by skipping the name brands, and children learned quickly that you ate what was served. Maybe you added a spoonful of sugar for good measure. Maybe not. But in those modest breakfasts, there was nourishment. Not only for the body, but in some small way, for the spirit of making do. If you could bring back one thing from the 1970s, just for the nostalgia, what would it be? Let us know in the comments. Tang. Was it really orange juice? Of course not. But in the kitchens of the 1970s, Tang was close enough. Bright, bold, and waiting in that familiar tub with the cracked lid and the scooper forever buried at the bottom. You'd stir it into a pitcher of tap water with a long spoon, watch it fizz like something alive, and imagine yourself suiting up for a mission to the moon. No one mistook it for fresh squeezed citrus. It didn't taste like oranges. It didn't taste like anything nature had intended. And yet, it was sweet, cold, and brimming with possibility. A glass of Tang came with more than just vitamins. It came with dreams. NASA had said so. And for children whose only spaceship was a cardboard box in the backyard, that was more than enough. Mothers served it with breakfast, lunch, even dinner when real juice ran dry. It colored your lips, coated your teeth, and somehow made you feel modern, connected to a world far beyond your neighborhood. It showed up in thermoses and homemade popsicles, adding a little color to otherwise gray days. It didn't nourish like water or refresh like fruit, but it endured. And in a decade full of doing more with less, Tang earned its place at the table. Liver and onions. It wasn't supper, it was a signal. You could smell it long before your mother said a word, that unmistakable wave of something sharp and sorrowful drifting down the hallway. Liver and onions had a way of announcing itself, boldly, without apology, and not one child greeted it with joy. The liver, pan-fried until it turned the color of an old boot, rested beneath a blanket of onions that, despite their best efforts, couldn't soften the blow. You sat down because you had to, not because you wanted to. Your fork hesitated. You'd try to hide your grimace. You knew this was dinner, and there wasn't going to be a backup plan. No ketchup could disguise the taste. No slice of bread could ease the texture. You chewed slowly, willing it down, glancing toward the clock and hoping dessert hadn't been quietly canceled. Now and then, you slipped a piece under the table for the dog, who occasionally had the sense to decline. The rest went into next day sandwiches, stiffer and sadder. But you ate, because that's what families did. They stretched, they endured, and somehow you came away with a peculiar kind of gratitude, not for the liver itself, but for the resilience it taught you with every bitter, necessary bite. Ice cream truck. In those long golden summers of the 1970s, few things stirred more excitement than the distant jingle of the ice cream man's brass bells drifting along the block. Not digitized tunes, but real bells, rung by hand or swung from the side window. That chime always found its way to your ears, slipping through screen doors and catching kids mid-sentence. Games paused. Sandwiches lay forgotten. Bare feet hit the pavement as children scrambled for coins buried in junk drawers and couch cushions. The truck rolled by like a rolling dream, painted in cheerful colors, with a menu pasted to its side, offering frozen novelties that felt pulled from a comic strip. Rocket-shaped popsicles, sherbet spirals, and those wobbly character bars with mismatched candy eyes. But it wasn't only the treat. It was the wild dash, the thrill of catching it in time, the certainty that for just a few coins, you'd claimed something big. No one asked for proof of wealth. That clinking bell turned your street into a parade of laughter. And when it finally appeared, every kid was part of the show, with one hand waving and the other clutching hope on a stick. Saturday morning cartoons. They weren't simply cartoons. For children in the 1970s, Saturday mornings felt like a weekly holiday, celebrated with pajamas still rumpled and cereal poured into mismatched bowls. You'd rise early, tiptoe out before the rest of the house stirred, and stretch out across the living room carpet, eyes on the screen like it held the world. The television offered a rotating lineup of familiar heroes and oddballs. G.I. Joe marched in with bravado. The real Ghostbusters zapped through haunted cities. The Smurfs, tiny and blue, seemed to march straight from imagination. Networks didn't guess at what kids wanted. They delivered it with precision. But it didn't always go as planned. Sometimes the grown-up world barged in. A newsflash, a weather emergency, or an unexpected special report. That blank screen left kids blinking, wondering why the fun had been paused by forces beyond their control. Still, week after week, the ritual returned. Spoons clinked in bowls. Animated theme songs blasted through the television set. You didn't analyze or critique. It was enough that they appeared. For a short while, everything worked in rhythm. And as the shows ended and sunlight crept in, you knew you'd seen something worth waking up for. Tray tables. Which dinner made of aluminum and preservatives could feel almost festive? In homes all over America during the 1970s, that honor went to the TV dinner, a divided tray heated in the oven, set down gently on a wobbly table facing the glow of primetime television. It wasn't gourmet, and nobody claimed it was nourishing, but it was different. And sometimes, different was enough. Perhaps your mother had called it an early night. Perhaps your father was working late. Or maybe this was planned in advance. One of those evenings when everything felt slightly looser than usual. You peeled back the foil with care, hoping for a brownie that hadn't fused with the potatoes. Salisbury steak swam in salty gravy. Mashed potatoes held the shape of the spoon. Vegetables were more suggestion than substance. Still, the tray brought comfort. A break from rules. A seat on the couch. A meal you didn't have to share or explain. You sat cross-legged, eyes fixed on the screen, and ate slowly. No linen, no passing dishes, no one judging how fast you finished dessert. If the brownie stayed on your plate from first bite to last chew, that was a quiet kind of triumph in itself. Enjoyed the trip down memory lane? Click like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. Bologna Sandwiches. Among the many quiet symbols of growing up poor in the 1970s, few meals were more constant or more humbling than the humble Bologna sandwich. It wasn't a matter of choice. It was what you had. 2 slices of soft white bread cradled a single round of pale, processed meat. No lettuce, no tomato, and certainly no cheese, unless it happened to be government issued. On better days, you might get a swipe of mustard or mayonnaise, applied thin with the back of a spoon. Most days, though, it was plain, chewy, dry, and strangely sour, with the faint smell of lunchboxes that had sat too long in the sun. Parents sometimes fried it to give it shape and sizzle, but cold or warm, it showed up again and again in brown paper sacks and on cafeteria tables from coast to coast. Bologna didn't care who you were or how many siblings you had. It showed up whether you wanted it or not, and you learned early on not to trade it, because chances were the kid next to you had the same thing. It wasn't gourmet, but it did the job. When money was tight, lunch didn't need flair. It only needed to be enough to carry you into the rest of the day. Plastic-covered couch. In a house where every dollar mattered, the living room couch wore armor. Clear, crinkly plastic stretched tight like a second skin. It wasn't there for comfort. It was meant to preserve. Sitting on it wasn't so much relaxing as enduring. As soon as you lowered yourself, it answered with a high-pitched squeak and the tug of your skin against heat-sealed vinyl. Summers made it unbearable. Bare legs clung to the surface as if fused, and every shift meant peeling yourself away from a sticky trap. In colder months, the couch turned slick and unwelcoming, icy through your clothing, and creaking loud enough to spook the dog. Yet nobody questioned its presence. That plastic cover was a contract. Keep the couch spotless, no matter the cost. Guests rarely settled into it unless specifically invited, and children were warned. Don't squirm, don't spill, don't lean too hard. The room looked polished, lace doilies, upright lamps, the air tinged with disinfectant, but it never truly belonged to anyone. It was both a display and a boundary. And when you stood up, your calves bore the gridwork left behind. It didn't improve the seating, but it did protect the furniture. And in that single mission, the plastic cover always succeeded. Rotary Phone. Is any experience quite as deliberate as waiting for a rotary dial to click its way back to start, gear by gear, as you tried to reach someone down the line? In the 1970s, phones weren't light or effortless. They were heavy fixtures, often avocado green or beige, resting on a table cluttered with mail, paper clips, and yesterday's to-do list. The cord was an unruly spiral, stretched and tangled beyond repair. Once it frayed, a misstep could zap your ear or silence the whole call. Making contact took determination. You'd slide a finger into the numbered ring, twist it fully, let it grind back, and repeat. If you misdialed near the end, you started again from scratch. Occasionally, the receiver lost its grip on the line. You'd grip exposed wires between your fingers, trying to keep the signal alive long enough to shout whatever mattered most. We didn't grow up with shortcuts or luxury. What we had was tension, resistance, and a kind of dependability built from effort. Those calls weren't fast or private, but they connected people in a way screens never quite manage. Each ring, each crackle, each stubborn turn of the dial reminded you, this conversation mattered, because you earned every second of it. Shoes. A hole in your shoe didn't mean replacement. It called for improvisation. You'd rip apart an old cereal box, trace the outline of your worn-down sole, and slide that cutout into your sneaker as makeshift support. Maybe it came from a box of Cheerios or Raisin Bran. For a brief stretch, it worked. It even stayed warm early on. But hit a puddle, and the cardboard gave up fast. Your socks absorbed the result. Wet, heavy, and glued to your skin. You didn't stop. You dried them by the radiator, swapped in a new insert, and kept moving forward. Shoes weren't replaced because they were worn. They were replaced because they were gone. Until then, you made do. Flapping soles, curled toes, frayed laces. It was all part of the routine, and somehow they still held together. Running was risky, jumping was rare, and gym class turned into cautious footwork. But nobody saw it as strange. That cereal box in your shoe stood for resourcefulness and quiet strength. You learned how to stretch time with scissors and tape, how to move carefully when the world beneath your feet wasn't forgiving. It wasn't stylish or smooth, but it got you where you needed to go, and that counted for a lot. Twin bed. How did sharing a twin bed become a childhood tradition rather than a hardship? In houses where money stayed tight and space even tighter, one mattress often pulled double duty. It sagged in the middle, pulled you both inward, and never once offered enough blanket for two. At bedtime, each kid claimed a side, but by dawn, it was an untamed pile of arms, knees, and tossed sheets. If you were the oldest, you earned the wall, less risk of falling. If you were smaller, you curled near the foot like a makeshift heater. The bed springs groaned with every shift. The pillow carried 100 heads worth of sleep, and the fabric bore more patches than cushion. But no one complained. You shared more than a bed. You shared stories whispered in the dark, silent battles for blanket territory, and the simple comfort of knowing someone was close. Bigger beds were luxuries seen on television. You had what you had, a noisy twin and a nightly truce. Privacy meant pretending to be asleep, and peace came not from space, but from togetherness. And as far as anyone was concerned, that was more than enough to sleep on. Did your family use any of these budget tricks to get through the 70s? Share one we might have missed. Hand-me-down clothes. Getting a sack of clothes from relatives you barely spoke to wasn't optional. It was tradition, bundled inside a black garbage bag and carrying the unmistakable scent of basements that hadn't seen daylight in years. You didn't choose them. You didn't ask for them. But every few months, your mother would arrive with what she called perfectly good clothes, destined for your closet, whether you agreed or not. Those hand-me-downs came with a past. The shirts had collars stretched in all directions. The jeans were stained in places no one wanted to talk about. The shoes didn't fit, but you were told, they'll break in. Your winter coat carried 3 lives on its seams and the wrong name in the collar. Complaining wasn't an option. You smiled on cue while your aunt beamed as if she'd just delivered gold. At school, kids noticed, so you became quick with a joke or learned to stay out of sight. What you really longed for was something new. Pants without patches, shirts without sag, and shoes that belonged to no one else. But what you got was a wardrobe stitched from hand-me-down survival. And somehow, that had to be enough. Family car. A hole in the floorboard didn't signal disaster. It simply meant the road came with a front row view. Beneath your sneakers, the pavement flashed by in a blur, and that rusted gap near the gas pedal did more than let in wind. It gave you updates on the weather. In winter, cold air clawed at your ankles. In spring, the puddles climbed higher than your socks. Summer tossed gravel against your shins in a gritty parade. And yet, nobody called it broken. Dad tossed down an old bath mat and declared it good as new. The vinyl seats clung in heat and turned stiff in cold. The windows weren't powered. They required determination. That dashboard could knock the wind out of you if the brakes caught you off guard. Toys that rolled beneath the seat sometimes vanished to the highway below. But the car still moved. It got you to school, to the store, to Sunday dinner. You didn't need plush interiors. You needed motion. And when the fumes crept in through the vents, you rolled the window down and carried on, because getting where you needed to go meant more than what carried you. no dryer. Was skipping the dryer really a hardship, or just another ordinary Tuesday in the 1970s? Laundry back then was less about convenience and more about cooperation, ritual, and the stubborn usefulness of clothespins. Lines stretched from tree to pole like makeshift scaffolding, and the garments they held danced in the wind with a kind of defiance. One person hauled the basket, another did the pinning, knees brushing damp weeds or half-frozen earth. The breeze carried the scent of soap, grass, and the faint sting of rusted wire. In summertime, the sun worked overtime, baking the towels stiff and bleaching whites into brittle perfection. But when the cold settled in, shirts froze stiff before they ever dried, and jeans could stand upright on their own. Underwear threatened to migrate with the next gust. You learned to clip tight and hope the wind showed mercy. No one complained because the job got done. The sheets crackled against your skin, and the towels scratched you dry with honesty. Those weren't laundry days, they were teamwork written in cloth. And when it was over, the clothes didn't go into hampers. They went into old bread bags, folded and ready for another round. Canned dinners. Supper pulled from a can wasn't cooking, it was pure invention. The kitchen turned into a game of chance, where spinning the pantry shelf might land you on creamed corn, SpaghettiOs, or a dented tin of something labeled beef with gravy that looked more ambition than cow. You didn't protest. You pulled the manual can opener from the junk drawer, cranked it open with a sigh, and let the contents plop into a pot like secondhand stew. Vienna sausages became dinner theater, green beans cooked down to mush passed as greens, and fruit cocktail. That was your prize, a syrupy medley that always included exactly one cherry and too many pear cubes. If it came hot and didn't smell awful, it passed for supper. On tired nights, a spoonful of bargain brand ketchup made it bearable. On others, you ate in silence, grateful it didn't come with weevils. The food was salty, soft, and strange, but it filled plates and gave parents one less thing to worry about. And after the dishes were rinsed and the cans stacked for recycling or craft projects, you headed toward a bathroom where the soap never lathered right, but you used it anyway. Toilet paper. Toilet paper in those days wasn't soft or comforting. It was a lesson in endurance. It came thin, rough, and wrapped in plastic that made promises it couldn't keep. The roll looked friendly enough from a distance, but up close it was as coarse as a barn floor. Each sheet was engineered for discomfort, and you learned to fold, not crumple, if you valued your skin. If it tore, you didn't panic. You adapted. Gray or off-white, occasionally laced with a splinter that proved paper once came from wood. The good stuff was for guests or people with carpeting in the bathroom. For the rest of us, the store brand roll was part of the deal. You used what you had. And then came the wrapping paper, not to be wasted, not to be torn. It came off gifts with surgical care, tape peeled, creases pressed, folds saved with all the attention of family recipes. Mothers oversaw the process, like museum curators. When holidays returned, so did the paper, stashed in drawers or boxes labeled by occasion. You thought everyone did that, until you saw a friend rip into a present without hesitation. But it did matter, because when resources were tight, everything had worth. Not paper, not pride, not the quiet lessons those years left behind. Think your old junk from the 70s is worthless? Think again. Hidden in attics, basements, and garage sales across America are treasures from the 1970s that collectors will pay big money for. From kitchenware to toys, these forgotten items might just turn into cash. Let's count down 25 surprising things from the 70s that could make you rich today. Sports trading cards. Remember those old sports cards you used to trade with your buddies on the front porch? Or maybe you kept them stacked in a rubber-banded pile, tucked in a shoebox under your bed. Well, if those cards are from the 1970s, they might just be worth more than you ever imagined. Back then, Nobody thought twice about them. We flipped them, bent them, even clipped them to our bike spokes just to hear that clicking sound. And moms, they tossed entire collections like yesterday's junk. But here's the thing, those same cards, the ones we barely held on to, are now collector gold. One rookie baseball card from that era recently sold for $200,000. That's right, 200 grand for a piece of cardboard. Why? Because the 70s were the last time people collected for fun, not profit. And that makes mint condition cards from that era incredibly rare. So before you throw out that old box in the attic, maybe open it. You just might find your childhood memories are worth a small fortune. Lincoln Memorial Penny. It's easy to overlook a penny. Most of us don't think twice before tossing one into a tip jar or the bottom of a junk drawer. But some pennies, especially one very specific kind from the 1970s, are anything but small change. In 1970, two versions of the Lincoln Memorial penny were released, one with a large date and another with a smaller, more delicate font. The small date variety is extremely rare, and that tiny detail makes a huge difference. Only a handful are known to exist in pristine condition. And the value? We're not talking a couple bucks. We're talking tens of thousands, as much as $30,000 or more at auction. Not bad for something most people leave lying on the sidewalk. It makes you wonder, how many of these have passed through our hands without a second thought? Turns out, even the most ordinary things can hold extraordinary worth, if you know what to look for. Lord of the Rings Knickerbocker playset. Long before Peter Jackson turned The Lord of the Rings into a global cinematic event, there was an earlier version, an animated film from 1978 that few remember, but collectors definitely do. Alongside that film came a line of action figures made by Knickerbocker Toys. They didn't exactly fly off shelves at the time. In fact, most were quickly forgotten, until now. These figures, Frodo, Gandalf, Gollum, and the rest, weren't mass-produced like today's merchandise, and because the film didn't become a hit, many sets were left unopened, unsold, or lost in attics. But with the rebirth of Tolkien fandom thanks to the movies and streaming series, those once overlooked toys have become incredibly valuable. A complete set in good condition? It could bring in tens of thousands at auction. Funny how a forgotten toy, once passed over in a bargain bin, can become a crown jewel for a collector. Sometimes it takes time, and a little magic, for the world to realize what was special all along. Vintage perfumes. Have you ever caught a scent that instantly took you back to grandma's house, a first date, or a moment you thought you'd forgotten? That's the magic of fragrance. And for perfume collectors, that magic is everything. Today, people are chasing rare perfumes from the past, not because they smell trendy, but because they capture a feeling, a time, a place. The 1970s had some unforgettable scents, bold, mysterious, earthy. Perfumes like Alyssa Ashley's Civet Oil weren't just beauty products. They were bottled memories. And guess what? They're now worth thousands to collectors. Some of these old bottles are nearly impossible to find, especially unopened ones. For serious enthusiasts, finding one is like discovering buried treasure. The older and rarer, the more valuable. So if you've got a bottle from your mom's vanity or your grandmother's dresser gathering dust, don't toss it. Take a second look. What once smelled like the past could now smell like money. Comic books. Long before superhero movies ruled the box office, heroes lived on cheap newsprint pages, folded in backpacks, traded at lunch tables, and stacked under beds. For many kids growing up in the 70s, comic books weren't collectibles. They were companions. But those same comics, especially the first appearances of now iconic characters, are today among the most valuable items in pop culture history. Giant-size X-Men #1, Tomb of Dracula #10, and early issues of The Amazing Spider-Man or Detective Comics. If they're in top condition, you could be looking at five-figure price tags. The 70s marked the beginning of the Bronze Age of comics, a time when storytelling got bolder and heroes got grittier. And now, collectors are chasing those very issues for what they represent: cultural shifts, artistic milestones, and memories that never faded. Not every comic is worth a fortune, but every crease, every faded corner holds a story. And sometimes, the real value lies in how it made you feel the first time you turned the page. Shag carpets. Ah, shag carpets, those thick, fuzzy floor coverings that felt more like grass than fabric. If you grew up in the 70s, chances are you had one in your living room. Maybe bright orange, avocado green, or mustard yellow. You either loved it or tripped over it. Shag carpets were the ultimate symbol of groovy comfort. They were loud, soft, and impossible to vacuum properly. But today, that retro charm has made a serious comeback. Interior designers and collectors are searching for authentic vintage pieces with bold colors and unique textures. Believe it or not, some original round or patterned shag rugs are now fetching over $1,000, especially if they're clean and well preserved. Not bad for something that once doubled as a nap spot for the dog. They may not be sleek or subtle, but shag carpets had personality. And in a world of cold tiles and gray tones, maybe that's exactly what people are craving again: warmth, weirdness, and just a little bit of retro flair under their feet. Antique watches. Watches used to be more than accessories. They were milestones, a graduation gift, a retirement send-off, a symbol that you had arrived. And if yours came from a brand like Rolex, Omega, or Heuer back in the 60s or 70s, well, that old watch might just be ticking its way towards serious value. Collectors today are eager to get their hands on these mechanical marvels, especially models with original parts, classic dials, or limited production runs. A vintage Rolex Submariner or Omega Speedmaster in good shape. That's not just stylish, it's investment grade. Some pieces sell for tens of thousands, but it's not just about precision or branding. These watches carry stories. They were worn through first jobs, anniversaries, and cross-country road trips. They've kept time through generations. In a world obsessed with speed and constant upgrades, antique watches remind us to slow down, to value craftsmanship, and to appreciate the beauty of time well spent. Vintage models. From toy shelves to magazine covers, the word model meant different things in the 1970s, but both kinds are now high on collectors' radars. On one hand, you've got the miniature kind: die-cast cars, plastic kits, and limited-run figurines. Think classic Chevy models, slot cars, or sci-fi ships from forgotten TV shows. These tiny pieces of pop culture are now commanding serious attention and serious price tags, especially if they're still in the box. On the other hand, there were the runway icons: Beverly Johnson, Cheryl Tiegs, faces that defined fashion in the 70s and changed the way beauty was seen. Memorabilia tied to their careers, like original magazine covers or signed photos, are now hot items in the vintage fashion scene. Different kinds of models, same kind of impact. Whether they sat on your bedroom shelf or stared back from a glossy cover, these vintage models captured more than trends. They captured a moment. And sometimes it's the style of an era that ends up lasting the longest. Vintage jewelry. Back in the 70s, jewelry didn't whisper, it spoke. Bold gold chains, oversized pendants, chunky bangles in rich colors like amber, burgundy, and deep ocean blue. It was a time when fashion said exactly what you were feeling, and your jewelry made sure nobody missed it. Designers like Cartier and Tiffany and Company leaned into drama, creating statement pieces that still turn heads today. Whether it was textured gold or daring designs, those pieces are now collector favorites. And if you've got one of those originals, especially with a signature or stamp, you could be looking at a big payday. But there's more to it than dollar signs. These weren't just accessories. They were gifts from loved ones, mementos of big moments, or impulse buys on a good day. Each scratch, each clasp, each gem tells a story. And sometimes, slipping on a bracelet from decades ago feels less like wearing jewelry and more like picking up where something beautiful left off. Vintage video games. Before open worlds and Ultra HD graphics, gaming was a joystick, a cartridge, and hours of pixelated joy. If you were a kid in the late 70s, chances are you remember the thrill of plugging in an Atari console, hearing that bloop, bloop, bloop of Pong, or chasing ghosts in Pac-Man. These early video games didn't just launch an industry, they sparked a movement. And today, collectors are going after the very systems and cartridges that started it all. The Atari 2600, first released in 1977, along with games like Space Invaders, Adventure, and the original Donkey Kong, are now hot ticket items, especially if they're boxed and working. Some rare titles can fetch thousands, but even more than their value, they represent a simpler time when press start meant fun, not frustration. Funny how those chunky pixels and beeping sound effects still make us smile. Turns out, you don't need realism to relive the real magic. You just need a cartridge and a little imagination. Toy train sets. There's something about toy trains that never really leaves you. Maybe it was the way they circled the Christmas tree, or the quiet hum and click of the tracks as you watched them go round and round. For a lot of kids in the 70s, toy trains weren't just toys. They were a whole world in miniature. One brand stood out above the rest, Lionel. Their sets were beautifully detailed and built to last, and over time, they became more than playthings. They became collector's gold. Special editions, like the Mickey Mouse Express from 1977, are now highly sought after by hobbyists and nostalgia lovers alike. Condition matters, of course. The original box, working parts, and full sets can send values soaring into the thousands. But even if yours isn't worth a fortune, don't underestimate its worth, because that tiny engine might still carry something big, like the memory of a wide-eyed child watching it make its very first loop on Christmas morning. Which decade should we cover next? 1960s, 1980s, or 1990s? Cast your vote in the comments. Rare stamps. Once upon a time, sending a letter meant more than just paying a bill. It meant choosing a stamp, carefully, sometimes even with pride. And while most stamps got tossed without a thought, a few were quietly building value, one envelope at a time. In the 1970s, some stamps were printed with errors, like the famous inverted Jenny, where the plane was printed upside down. Others were issued in limited runs or featured historic events. And if you happen to have one of these tucked away in an old album or inherited box, you might be looking at serious money. We're talking stamps that have sold for $80,000, even close to $1 million, depending on rarity and condition. The right stamp at the right time? It's paper gold. Vintage furniture. Before flat pack kits and online orders, furniture was built to last and built with personality. In the 1970s, home decor was bold, colorful, and proudly unconventional. Think curved lines, funky fabrics, and pieces that didn't just fill a room. They defined it. Back then, nobody thought that a low-slung love seat or kidney-shaped coffee table would one day be collectible. But today, designers and retro lovers are on the hunt for original 70s furniture, especially pieces in good condition with that signature vintage flair. Items that were once seen as outdated or even tacky are now proudly called mid-century modern. Prices have jumped fast. Some items are now worth thousands on resale markets, especially if they're rare or part of a limited run. Funny how something that once made people roll their eyes can suddenly make them open their wallets. Turns out, style never really disappears. It just waits for the world to catch up. Rare sneakers. Long before sneaker drops, crashed websites, and resellers ruled the market, sneakers were just sneakers. You laced them up, wore them out, maybe scuffed them on the blacktop. But if you had a pair of Nike Cortez, Puma Suede, or Adidas Superstar back in the 70s, turns out you were walking around in what's now vintage gold. These weren't just shoes, they were style statements. The Cortez hit shelves in 1972 and became a cultural icon. The Adidas Superstar, a streetwear legend, and the Puma Suede, let's just say it knew how to turn heads on and off the court. Today, collectors will pay thousands for well-preserved pairs, especially rare colorways, collaborations, or first editions. Even used ones can fetch a pretty penny, depending on the model and condition. Funny how the shoes we once ran wild in now sit behind glass. But maybe that's the charm. They remind us of where we've been and prove that great design never really goes out of step. Scientific gadgets. Back in the 70s, science wasn't just something you learned at school. It was something you could play with on your bedroom desk. Galileo thermometers, Newton's cradles, radiometers spinning under the sun. These weren't just gadgets. They were little windows into how the world works. Every kid who got a science kit or built a crystal radio felt like a mini Einstein. And those sleek designs, often made of glass, brass, and polished wood, they've aged beautifully. Today, collectors search for vintage scientific gadgets, not just for how they function, but for how they feel. Curious, clever, and timeless. Even early electronic calculators and oscilloscopes from the era are gaining value, especially when they still work or come in original packaging. These gadgets may seem simple now, but they taught a generation to wonder, to poke, to question, to explore. Lunchboxes. Remember walking into school with your favorite lunchbox in hand? Maybe it had Star Wars, the Dukes of Hazzard, the $6 Million Man, or your favorite cartoon splashed across a metal case. You didn't just bring lunch, you brought your personality. Back in the 70s, lunchboxes were serious business. Kids would compare designs, trade thermoses, and carry them like trophies. Most got dented, rusted, or tossed when plastic ones took over. But the survivors? They're now collector gold. Mint-condition metal lunchboxes with matching thermoses can fetch hundreds, sometimes thousands, especially if the design is rare or tied to a beloved franchise. But even the more common ones, worn and well-loved, are being snapped up by fans who want to reclaim a piece of childhood. And maybe that's what makes them special. It's not the paint or the metal. It's the memory of opening the lid to find a sandwich, a note from mom, and the comfort of something familiar in a big, noisy world. Pyrex dishes. Let's be honest. If you grew up in an American kitchen, you probably saw Pyrex dishes long before you ever heard the name. Maybe it was the floral casserole dish your grandma brought out every Thanksgiving, or that bright, cheery bowl your mom used for pancake batter every Sunday morning. Back in the 70s, Pyrex wasn't fancy. It was just everywhere. Durable, colorful, and made to last. But here's the fun twist. Those same dishes folks once bought for a few bucks at the store? Today, some of them are worth serious money. Collectors are hunting down specific patterns, butterprint, gooseberry, and that classic turquoise. Some sets go for hundreds, even thousands, especially if they're in great shape. Why? It's nostalgia you can hold in your hands. And maybe even serve lasagna in. That casserole dish you haven't touched in years? It's not just kitchen clutter. It could be a hidden gem. And that bowl tucked way in the back of your cabinet? Don't be surprised if it ends up stealing the spotlight, whether at a collector's auction or your next family gathering. Do you still have anything from the 1970s? If so, what is it? And do you think it might be worth something today? Typewriters. Remember that steady clack-clack sound from another room? That wasn't noise. It was the sound of focus, of letters turning into stories, one key at a time. Typewriters didn't just type, they spoke. In the 1970s, having a typewriter in the house meant you were serious, about work, about writing, maybe even about becoming the next great novelist. And even though we've moved on to laptops and touchscreens, collectors today are bringing these machines back into the spotlight, especially the electric models from that era. Sleek, heavy, built like little tanks. If yours still works and has all its parts, you could be looking at a few $100, maybe even over $1,000, depending on the brand and condition. But beyond the money, there's something special about the weight of a typewriter, the way it makes you slow down, hit each key with purpose. It may look like a relic now, but give those keys a gentle tap. You'll feel the weight of every word. VHS tapes. Remember when a Friday night meant swinging by the local video store, carefully picking out a VHS tape and racing home to pop it in before the popcorn got cold? Back then, owning a movie meant something. It wasn't just a file you clicked. It was a box, a label, a ritual. And while we've moved way past rewind buttons, some of those old tapes are now serious collector's items, especially if they're sealed, rare, or feature iconic films. Take an original copy of Jaws, for example. Someone shelled out over $30,000 for one. Not because the film's rare, but because that tape represented a moment in time. The value isn't just in what's on the tape. It's in what it meant. Family movie nights, first dates, childhood fears of sharks. Most folks see an old VHS tape and think, junk. But a collector sees a time capsule. That faded label, those worn plastic edges, they tell a story. The real question is, who's ready to buy into your story? Apple computers. Back in the mid-70s, a strange little machine started popping up in basements and garages, something called an Apple computer. It didn't look like much. Wood casing, a keyboard with no frame, no monitor. But it was revolutionary. Most people at the time didn't think twice about it. It wasn't sleek, it wasn't flashy, and let's be honest, most folks had no idea what to do with one. But today, collectors and tech historians are scrambling to get their hands on those early Apple models, especially the original Apple one. Only a few hundred were ever made, and even fewer survived. If yours still powers on, or better yet, comes with its original box, you could be sitting on something worth over $20,000. And no, not because it runs like new, but because it represents the start of a digital revolution that changed everything. It's not just an old computer anymore. It's a symbol of where we came from and how far we've gone. And for the right buyer, that kind of origin story is priceless. IKEA furniture. Let's face it, most people don't buy IKEA furniture thinking it'll become a collector's item. You buy it because it's cheap, simple, and you can carry the whole bookshelf in one flat box after spending 3 hours putting it together. But here's the twist. Some of that old IKEA furniture from the 70s and 80s, it's now selling for thousands online. Why? Because back then, IKEA wasn't just making affordable stuff. They were making bold, modernist pieces that tapped into the youth culture. Clean lines, playful colors, and a whole lot of charm. Design lovers and collectors today are hunting for those original pieces, especially limited runs and now retired models. A funky coffee table or a minimalist armchair you nearly gave away. That could be worth way more than you paid. Funny how something you once struggled to assemble with an Allen key is now considered mid-century modern treasure. Turns out, even furniture can grow into its legacy. You just have to wait long enough for the world to notice. Magazines. There was a time when landing on the cover of a magazine meant you made it. Whether it was Rolling Stone, Life, Vogue, or Time. Those glossy pages captured the faces, fashions, and big moments of each generation. In the 1970s, Magazines weren't just reading material, they were pop culture snapshots. People collected them, passed them around, and saved issues that felt important. Celebrity weddings, moon landings, political scandals, and the stars of Saturday Night Live. Today, collectors are combing through thrift shops and estate sales, hunting for rare issues, especially first appearances, special editions, and covers featuring now iconic celebrities. Some sell for $20, some for hundreds. And a few. They've gone for thousands. The right cover at the right time can turn yellowing paper into a serious payday. Have you ever found a retro item at a garage sale or thrift store that turned out to be valuable? Share your story with us. Board games. Before tablets and smartphones took over family nights, there was the board game shelf, tucked in a hallway closet, stacked with colorful boxes and missing dice. You probably remember the shouting, the cheating, the last-minute comebacks. It wasn't just about winning, it was about playing together. In the 1970s, board games were a big deal, and not just Monopoly or Scrabble. We're talking licensed gems, games based on TV shows, movies, and pop culture that have all but vanished. One rare example? The Lost in Space board game. It didn't just get lost in space, it got lost in time, until collectors brought it back. Now, vintage games in good condition are highly collectible, especially if they're complete. Limited editions, quirky titles, and anything with nostalgic artwork can go for hundreds or more. A cardboard box with plastic pieces and paper money may not seem like much, but when it holds memories of rainy afternoons and family feuds, that's the kind of value no app can replicate. Vinyl records. There's something magical about the soft crackle before the music starts on a vinyl record. It's not just sound, it's atmosphere. It's Sunday mornings with your dad, cleaning the house to Motown. It's your older brother showing off his rock collection like they were sacred relics. In the 1970s, vinyl wasn't a trend. It was the way to listen. Album art mattered. Flipping the record mattered. And now, that tactile, rich sound has made a huge comeback. Collectors, DJs, and even young music lovers are hunting down records from the past, especially ones in great condition. Not every vinyl will fetch a fortune, but first pressings, iconic albums, and records from artists who helped define the decade, those can go for hundreds, sometimes more. Designer handbags. In the world of fashion, nothing says timeless quite like a well-made handbag. And if it came from a big-name designer in the 1970s, you might be holding more than just leather and stitches. You could be holding a piece of history. Back then, handbags weren't just accessories. They were personal statements. Whether it was a slouchy bohemian crossbody or a sleek leather clutch, bags from that era reflected the freedom and flair of the time. Brands like Chanel, Hermès, and Louis Vuitton released designs that still turn heads today, and collectors are willing to pay top dollar for originals. Especially if the bag is rare, limited edition, or in great condition, it's not uncommon to see prices jump into the thousands, sometimes way beyond. But more than their price tags, these bags carry the spirit of the women who once wore them. Confident, bold, unforgettable. And in a world where trends come and go, it's the stories stitched into the seams that truly make them valuable. We've walked through threadbare jeans, powdered milk, and twin beds, signs of poverty, but also resilience. Which one do you remember most? Let us know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell for more stories like these. See you in the next video.